So, hi there, everybody. This is Jenny Clark with Solvability, and today's Freedom Friday, we have a special guest, Ben Zeev. I've known Ron for several years, and we've had these conversations that I show up, we have a conversation. Did it work, Ron? Did it work? Almost. And today he's going to tell us how big it really did work. Ron joined us last year for our GovCon Summit in Tampa and really had a lot to say at that event when we were talking about the innovation space and the challenges of it. So I'm just throwing up that we are opening up registration early for GovCon Summit because so many people are saying, I can't talk to my customers. I'm getting nowhere, sitting in meetings all day long. So I've opened up GovCon Summit. There's a bunch of bonuses if you sign up early. Next Thursday, I'm doing a virtual lunch for those people like, I want to sign up for GovCon Summit, but first I need to understand it a little bit better. So we'll be talking about that, but it's mastering the game of GovCon. And we're really changing the whole way that we do what you would have thought of as a small business conference. So Ron, I'm going to shut this off and make you the person. I can remember how to do it. Oh, I know what it is. Stop share. There we are. Looks like we've got everybody on. And where did Ron go? There he is. I'm going to make you the middle.
There you go.
All right. So Ron, thanks so much for being here with us. And I know that we've talked about World Housing Solution with no S before. And when I explained it to somebody, I said, you got to talk to Ron because he created something that's energy efficient. Solar reduces the load on the electrical grid. Just a few guys and a screwdriver can set it up. And you've evolved since then, but it's like, who wouldn't want this? Well, you kept going and talking to the government about it, but they didn't have a way to buy it. It didn't fit. And it's not that it's not a great solution, but nobody had written a requirement for something that was effective and fast and you know, all those things. So tell us about your evolution. Take it away, Ron.
So first of all, thank you, Jenny, for the opportunity to share with your friends and colleagues. And good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you guys are. We're on the East Coast in Florida, Central Florida, actually. So I'll give you the quick backstory of World Housing. We were born a little bit over a decade ago, trying to solve the plight of refugees after a disaster, driven by the challenge that we saw in Haiti after the earthquake, because what we saw there was the fact that we still responded to a disaster. We still respond to a disaster to this day with a 3,000-year-old technology, a stick and a cloth, a tent. So we created what we thought was a better solution that really dealt even in a deeper sense and provided an opportunity for the weakest members of our society, typically women and children in refugee camps, to be in a rigid, protected environment. And so we built a shelter. We designed a system that could be erected by hand above ground, so it had an adjustable leveling system, and designed out of a material that was virtually immune to the elements. So no mold, no mildew, no rot, no termites. And because of the way it was assembled, it also provided a very strong resistance to the elements, so wind, rain, earthquake. And then we got the answer time and again that, hey, that's kind of interesting, but a tent is good enough. And after a few of those, it became one of those where, you know, you keep on saying that because you don't have to live in one. But we contemplated our first failure fairly early on to what we were doing. And then we were discovered by someone in the Seabees. So I get this email from the gentleman in the US Navy, a construction battalion. I'll confess I had no idea what the Seabees were at the time. So I Googled what is a CB, and then I'm like, oh my God. So I engaged in conversation with the gentleman who says, hey, kind of interesting what you did, but can you make it bigger? To which the answer is, I'm an entrepreneur. The answer is yes. What was the question again? So he provided me with an understanding of what they were trying to achieve and said, can you make something about 700 square feet? So we went back, designed it, sent it back to him, and we finally get on the phone. And this is one of the first lessons I always talk about when it comes to entrepreneurship from our standpoint. The gentleman on the phone finally says to me, he goes, you know, you're not the only company that makes alternative form of construction that I've reached out to. And in my head, I go, well, duh, you're the freaking US Navy, right? And then he completes the sentence and he says, but you're the only one that responded to my email. To which I said, you mean I'm not the prettiest girl at the dance? I'm the only girl at the dance? And he said, well, something like that. And I said, you know what? I'll take the win. A win is a win. And so he challenged us to build the structure. So they went through and designed it. Excuse me, we designed, engineered. They flew here, checked us out. And for those of you that do and understand government acquisition, you'll find this interesting. He said to me, he goes, okay, are you in GSA? And I said, what's a GSA? And he then started asking and used a whole bunch of acronyms at me. And I didn't know any of them. And he said, you know what, the heck with it. We'll use a credit card and we'll buy this with a credit card. And I went, you know, we're not really set up to take a credit card. And so we kind of hit a wall at that point. But again, entrepreneurship, right? You have to figure it out. So I said, hey, wait a minute, I have an idea. I am on PayPal, so I can send you a PayPal invoice, and PayPal takes credit cards, so you can pay through PayPal. To which he says, remember, this is about 9 years ago. He goes, what's a PayPal? So my first contract with the government was done through a PayPal acquisition process, which apparently had never been done before, not really. So, you know, again, where there's a will, there's a way. So we built that, took it apart, rebuilt, delivered it to Mississippi, where they built it, took it apart and rebuilt it. It's been sitting there now for a little bit over 8 years. It's gone through, I think, five hurricanes now. I don't know how many tropical storms, and it still stands there. So we took the lessons that we're trying to do and deploy within the humanitarian world and pivoted, unbeknownst to us, in an area that we never thought we'd go to, into a government-based solution. They wrote a report. The report was evangelized through a variety of different areas, and then it caught the eye of a lieutenant colonel in Stuttgart. And he challenged us to design something for his applications. And I'd like to tell you, since then it's been champagne, caviar, and limousine, but it's not true. It's, you know, it's going from contract to contract, trying to stabilize the flow, understanding how the pipeline works, learning the language of the folks on the other side of the table. And I will confess that once upon a time, I would jokingly say, you know, there's no B2B or B2C, business to business or business to consumer. Always said there's only H to H, human to human, unless you're doing business to government. And then I would laugh. And the reality is, until I was able to get on the road and actually have a conversation and dialogue with the women and men in uniform across the table, I was not succeeding at all. So the human to human is actually across the board, irrespective of what category you fall into. And so that was a hard lesson to learn, but we learned it.
Well, that is such an important lesson, and we've all experienced this, especially with this COVID thing, because what people were used to creating meetings and going to different places, and now they can't. And I feel like what you've talked about is persistence. Keep going with this, because I know I talked to you when you were trying to get on the GSA schedule, and we went down that path for a little while. And okay, the hurdle there is you have to have sold X number of units on the GSA schedule for a period of time. And what you do is custom build. And the same thing is true, that you're not going to build this to inventory so you sell it, because you're just doing all kinds of different applications now. So bring us up to date. Did you do something on the base of the future?
So thank you for teeing it up so nicely for me. So we applied for the Base of the Future Challenge under AFWorks, and made it through the 9 circles of hell, as I affectionately call them, culminating with something that we'd never done before, which was a complete virtual demo and walkthrough, because you can't do it live anymore, right? The new normal, whatever that is. So we did a virtual walkthrough demo. The whole team was there. We choreographed it. Everybody was doing their thing, and we won. So what I mean by we won is We're the only shelter within our category. There's no other shelter company that was that came to. It's one of the finalists within the Base of the Future, and it's based on something that we learned along the way. And we kept on talking in the beginning, again, from a language standpoint, for anyone that wants to understand how to do business with the government. I was, very naively talking about we're holistic, we're, lower carbon footprint, and we're green, and the yawns across the table from me were not always captured because I was so focused on we're holistic and all those things, until I went to a conference about 4 years ago in DC, where in the room were all kinds of folks dealing with alternative form of energy and green energy and green solutions. And one person after the other on stage walked up and said, here are the problems we're trying to solve. If you solve these problems and happen to be green, great. We're not going to buy you just because you're green. And I know it sounds silly in this aha moment, but it goes back to something that we have to remember. People don't care about your solutions, they care about their problems. And when it comes to the DoD, the problems are sometimes harder to define, or we don't see them, right? They may come and ask us questions, and then along the way, say, can you solve this problem? I mean, we had one time, I had someone approach us and said, hey, Ron, I need you to build this for me. And it's going to Africa. And I said, that's awesome. Thank you, sir. We're in Africa. And the answer was Africa. So, it's a big continent with a lot of different temperature swings, and it can be 6 feet of rain in Cameroon or 130 degrees in the desert, or the snows of Kilimanjaro. And the answer was, yep. So we had to design a structure that we didn't. To this day, we don't know where it is. We dropped it off at an embassy and off it went. But it had to fit those requirements. And so one of the terms that was used multiple times at the conference was, focus on giving us less tail so we can have more tooth. And I turned to someone next to me and I said, what does that mean in English? And the person looked at me and said, less logistics, more money for toys. Oh! Okay, got it, right? And so our narrative changed. Not what do we do. What we do remain the same, but the story that we now tell, or we try to tell to the people across the table from us, and when we get an opportunity to meet with them, is to say, we reduce the logistical burden and risk to the US military, both CONUS and OCONUS. To which the question typically is, how? So by delivering a structure, a shelter that uses 300% less energy than a tent, which means less fuel trucks, less risk, less incursions on base, more opportunities to run off the grid and operate in an energy denied environment for the longest possible time with the least amount of risk. That has allowed us to capture the interest of some of the folks, including AFWorks, in the approach that we did for the Base of the Future.
Well, what's so important about what you're talking about is you had to start listening to the language of the customer so you could put it in terms that they meant. And I'd never heard of the less scale, more tooth.
Less
but
tail,
I
more
feel like
tooth.
there's a big language barrier that sometimes we run into because we aren't thinking in their heads. And that's really what you've done to change it. The other thing that I'm curious about is, how long did it take you from this Base of the Future concept to get to where, do you have money? Are you delivering on AFWorks? I mean, where are you in that cycle?
So let me reset this for a moment. AFWorks just happened. So when I say just happened, it happened in the last 60 days or so. And 60 days is a lot of time, but for anyone that does business with the US government, it's nothing. The benefit that it's given us is the access to a sole source contract. The challenge that it's given us is educating the customer and saying, hey, you can buy a shelter that operates better than Milcon without any of the headaches of Milcon, because we're not Milcon. We're classified as equipment by the US government. And it's still one of those challenges that for those that are not used to working with the DoD, the person across the table from you rotates sometimes annually, sometimes every 6 months, and sometimes you catch them right before they leave, and you build this rapport. You meet with someone, you gain their attention, their trust maybe, and then you call a month later and they're gone. Or you send emails. The government doesn't say this person no longer works here. It just poof vanishes. So you never get that feedback of so and so is longer there. So our job and our continuing job is to educate. We do something differently. You're familiar with tents, you're familiar with containers. Guess what? There's another option, and that's the challenge, and sometimes the difficulty, because it may be a little bit outside of the comfort zone, and people may not necessarily do this. And our biggest challenge is speaking to people that are both doing sustainment and also pay attention to people that do acquisition. Excuse me, the other way around, acquisition and sustainment. Because if I'm just talking to the acquisition person, he or she may say, this is all the pot of money I have. And the fact that I tell them, yes, so we're a little bit more than your pot of money, but next year you're saving 90%. You're reducing risk. They don't care because they only have so much. But if I talk to someone that sees either more of the chessboard or pays attention to this, then we have the ability to actually connect and have an impact. And we've been fortunate to brief the Assistant Secretary of the Army for that acquisition, logistics, and technology at the Pentagon twice. Still hasn't driven into contracts. So when you're asking about contracts, Jenny, so we've gotten contracts not through AFWorks, but through other means, and have now just recently we deployed, tested and deployed, first of its kind jump talk for the Marine Corps in support of the F-35 program. And that jump talk had two requirements primarily. One, it had to fit on 4 463 Lima pallets. So for those of you who, like me, a year and a half ago, did not know what that 463 Lima pallet, it's a special pallet that is being used on military cargo airplanes. So the Marine Corps at the Pentagon came to us and said, you get 4 pallets. What's the biggest building you can build using your patented leveling leg platform, A, and B, whatever it is you build has to be able to be deployed and operational in less than 8 hours. So we designed a roughly 800 square foot building that fits on 4 463 Lima pallets. And we delivered it to the Marine Corps, trained them. And last week, they then re-delivered it and rebuilt it themselves and hit the 7.5 hour mark by doing it themselves without any supervision or assistance on our part. So they went from 0 to operational within the time allotted, the first time out. And we're like high-fiving each other. And the benefit as well for the Marine Corps in this case was, instead of 2 cargo airplanes moving 2 containerized legacy systems, in our case, they deploy 1 airplane, 1 building together allows the entire squadron to work in 1 space as opposed to 2 spaces. So the benefits are immeasurable. And again, there's certain things that we know that they're doing within that structure that we're not read into, we just can't. But we passed open secret qualification as well, so we qualified from that standpoint. And fingers crossed, we're having another conversation with them next week to talk about the next steps. So they have 2, and hopefully more will come on the heels of that.
Well, you've made so much progress, and there's so many elements to this business case. I've been to your facility in Sanford, and when I drove up to it, it was like this giant plant. And I walked back through, and you showed me at that time, I think you had a mobile dental place and a couple of other things. And we were talking about, Ron, how much do these cost? And because each of them is customized, then that's going to be different on what you do. If they order 1, the price would be slightly different than they ordered 5. You also have to somehow recover your design cost, and it's also like, how do you recover the cost of basically having to contact these organizations over and over again, trying to find your fit? And you've really identified all of the different challenges. And I don't know if you know that we've got Emily Harmon on here, and I saw her smiling earlier because from her background with the Navy, I can imagine how you would feel about that. Emily, do you mind just chiming in on this a little bit?
I was just, smiling. I think at the point when he was talking about how, it's just the same with the government. You got to meet the people. It's, relationships and meeting the people and getting in to meet them and then understanding their language, talking their language, all key things. And then understanding how people buy what you sell, because you could run into a junior person in acquisition who says, well, we can't buy what you're selling because that's a building. We can't buy construction. So you've got to understand that all the potential pushbacks and what the right answer is, because, like within the Navy, I know, like Navair, I used to buy some of what you're selling, through Navair, and we could because it wasn't a building. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. And not only that, but you guys, meaning, people in uniform, don't have the same language from branch to branch, which makes life even harder for civilians coming in going, I'll give you a funny story. I'm on a phone call and the person says to me, hey, Ron, can you build an ECP? And I went, I don't know, what's an ECP? The person goes, it's an entry control point. I went, I'm sorry, what's an entry control point? And definitely, the person on the other line just literally a big sigh of a guard shack. Oh, a guard shack. Yes, we can do a guard shack. Absolutely. But it's funny because subsequently I've talked to other people saying we can build ECPs. And I've had people in other branches goes, what's an ECP? And I went, you don't know what an ECP is? Let me tell you.
Well, if you talk to a government contracting officer, that's an engineering change proposal.
Well, there you go, right?
Yeah, and that's really scary. Hey, Russ Barnes threw a comment in there, and Russ, I'd love for you to talk about it because this is part of the reason why we created GovCon Summit, which we're doing virtually in April, is the questions and the business issues and everything you're coming into. You have to talk to a lot of people and you want to make sure that you're getting the right information, but you have to ask the right questions. So Russ, what was your comment you tossed out there?
So I was smiling when you said that everything is based on relationships, because I tell business owners who are interested in going into government space that first of all, in order to do business with the government, you have to be able to do business. Where people think I'll just get this contract, I'll make some money, and then I'll figure it out as I go along. Well, it doesn't work that way. And then, the other thing is it is all about relationships. And then the third thing I want to throw in before I turn it back is that, again, there is really no military when it comes down to it, because there are all the different services and they each have their culture and their language. And then even within each service, they have their culture and their language. And then there are civilian aspects of each service that has their culture and their language. And so when I talk to people about going into business with the government, I tell them you have to choose. And oh, by the way, we're just talking military, but then there's the Department of the Treasury and there's Department of Commerce and, all these other agencies that also have federal contracting opportunities available. So it's a big space. And in GovCon Summit, we help people to understand the magnitude of that space and understand that it is about relationships and that it is about being able to come in with a capability that the government needs. And if you have those things and you understand those things up front, it makes your path a little easier. I give you great kudos for being able to figure this stuff out in about 1.5 years. But I think the best part of it is that you had a very significant capability. And when you start with that, everybody's willing to work together to try to figure out how to get it where it needs to be.
Russ, again, from our standpoint, I still haven't figured it out. I will tell you right now, every day we learn something new. Every day we're asked something different. Everything from, ballistic resistance to EMP to skiffing or T-skiffing. And every time it sends me down an internet rabbit hole of education and understanding. Again, my naivete at the beginning of working with the DoD, when someone said, what other capabilities do you have? And I said, we can make it bulletproof. And I was sitting in a briefing room in Stuttgart, I still remember this, and an older gentleman looked at me and goes, Ron, there's no such thing as bulletproof. We can only shoot with something bigger. And I said, all right, so what's the proper terminology? He said, you say you can make it ballistic resistance and then resistant, and then you name to what level you can do this.
Yeah.
And I went, okay, thank you. Note to self, go back and learn, because, I'm going, because I've read somewhere that this is bulletproof. Bulletproof to what, right?
Yeah.
And again, those are all the things that we're learning on the day-to-day basis. And it goes back to something I alluded to, which is people don't care about your solutions, they care about their problems. But at the same time, some of the folks that are on this program right now know of problems and can connect dots that I will never see.
Yeah, yeah. And you'll never know. I mean, you'll never be in a situation where you have all the answers to whatever specific thing. And that's just the nature of the business. And in the military, it's adapt and overcome. No plan ever survives contact with the enemy. And you just have to be flexible. For us, flexibility is the key to air power. All those nice little statements there.
Yep.
So
we Lord knows, been there, done that, bought the T-shirt, seen the movie, and lessons come time and again. And we tell our customers all the time, we say, look, it may not be perfect, but we're going to kill ourselves to make it right. And one thing is certain is that we're not going to make the same mistake twice. We're going to screw up. We're human, back to human, right? But whatever it is, we're going to make it right. I'll give you as a fun example. We got a call. We delivered latrines to the middle of Africa for the Air Force, giant latrines, 100 feet long by 32 feet wide, each supporting 250 to 300 people, not at the same time. And then because we're holistic and because we care about the environment, but also the reduction of logistical burden, we designed it with a black to gray water treatment system and designed the entire latrines that way. And so we get a call a little bit after a year after it was delivered, they installed it. We got a call from, actually we got an email that says, hey, your black water treatment system has failed. Like, what do you mean? Give us some information. What do you mean? What has failed? Can you give us more details? We need to understand. And all we're getting is, it's failed. Can you please answer the question? Because if you don't tell us what has failed, we can't fix it. Finally, one of our team members said, you know what, we don't have a choice, we've got to go. And he was our in-house experts on black water treatment and water treatment systems. So he backs up, and I can make a whole episode just on his adventure going to the middle of Africa. And he arrives on location on a Tuesday. Wednesday morning, he's meeting with the entire base, with the commander, and he says, I'll call you when I'm done. He calls me up and he says, are you sitting down? I went, how bad is it? He goes, are you sitting down? Took a deep breath. I'm like, yes, I'm ready, I think. He goes, it's not plugged in. I went, excuse me? Said, it's not plugged in. That never occurred to me to ask, is it plugged in? He goes, not only is it not powered, the sewer is not hooked up to the system. So no wonder it doesn't work. They were technically correct. I didn't assess the issue by asking the right questions to understand it. So the commander looked at our Paul at the time, and he goes, can you make it work? And Paul said, well, it's been in the desert for more than a year without operating. Let me see what I can do. He goes, my boss is flying in next week. If you can make it work, you're going to make me look really good. So Paul literally spent, I think it was 21 hours with a sergeant, working back and forth, pumping, getting the thing primed and ready and operational. And it was. But for more than a year, because it arrived when the previous, whatever, long story short, we also know now to ask better questions to qualify the what doesn't work, and ask the silly question of, that we hate when we call customer support here for whatever it is. Is it plugged in? Yeah, of course it's plugged in. I know better now than to just assume, right? We all know what happens when we assume. In this case, I just assumed it was plugged in and something had happened, catastrophic, and they couldn't figure it out. And we incurred a lot of expenses to fly our person there. And here we are. So it functioned, it operates, it does its thing. We salvaged the relationship, which was a big thing. and we move on. Lessons learned. Is it plugged in?
Well, what you're talking about, Ron, is so important because it's all about communication, and sometimes you don't have two-way communication. Larry Martin, I would love to hear your thoughts on this because of your background. And Ron could have gone anywhere with this product, FEMA, or do you go to hurricane zones, or do you do this? And I think that's one of the big challenges in this whole strategy piece.
Ron, I come from a background from helping run the policy branch for the Transportation Command for the Air Force. So I've been smiling as you've been describing 463Ls and having pushed many of them around the world. But the fun that I put, and I reason I put the comment that I did about the looking glass is I spent the last 4 years of my career helping foreign governments write requirements into the US government to buy things from US companies. So think about what I just said. Not only do you have a US company trying to describe, you're now trying to go to a foreign country to get them to do. And the joke I like to tell the folks was we had long 6-month classes on how to do that. But often at the end, the requirement got done on a bar napkin at a discussion that was at a bar. And we would write the contract off of that because the bar napkin got to the core of what you described really accurately, which is the person's problem. Okay, the problem might be my budget is limited, but I need stuff and widgets. The problem might be I can buy your stuff if you can work with me in my country and build part of it in my country to make my parliament happy as I do that. And then you've done a great job describing the technical things that are all the normal sorts of things. But it's this exercise in communications, and the most interesting thing that's happened since March for me is how entrepreneurs like you now deal with this convoluted process when you can't do the normal cues you do, when you can't read the body language the way you do, when you can't listen and you don't do that. You know, it's like doing GovCon with 2 hands tied behind your back as you do that, and trying to eat a bowl of ice cream with just that. So I have great sympathy, but you've done a wonderful job in describing that, and that sort of awareness is invaluable to anybody that does GovCon, I think.
And thank you, Larry. And it's still, my journey, our journey is still fraught with perils and challenges and yet great opportunities to make a difference. Most recently, I was telling Jenny before we started that we've been approached to assist with part of Operation Warp Speed at a very localized level, but it's a tiny little drop, and as Jenny talked about, scale is what will allow us to survive or not, and the ability to reach escape velocity and build more of the same in order to be able to enhance. And Larry, I'll share a little frustration it's not that little actually, a huge frustration we've had recently, speaking of foreign military sales or dealing with foreign entities. As we've all listened, and without going down that rabbit hole, both sides of the aisle have been pounding on the desk and saying, we need to protect American jobs and American manufacturing in particular, right? And we've heard it from every single person. And yet, we just lost opportunities left, right, and through the middle to Italian companies selling to US Army in Germany for deployment in Poland. And I'm going, excuse me? Yes, okay, if it wasn't Italy, it goes back to what you just intimated. Sometimes you have to kind of smooth, make the locals happy and incorporate and pull. But quite frankly, when was the last time the Italians have bought anything from me for the Italian army? Never. But now we're taking, that's the frustration of a small company that doesn't have a lobbyist and doesn't have the ears of all the senators and the congressmen and women, and so the ability to try to have an impact or understand is mitigated by those things, and hampered furthermore by the fact that we can't really travel. So the ability to go and meet face to face with someone and say, hey, how about taking some of, those dollars and putting back in the US? We may not be as cheap, but then again, in the end, what have the Italians done ultimately? And I'm picking on the Italians because there's obviously all kinds of other things, but this is something that's obviously near and dear to my heart right now. That kind of creates a little friction and goes, so the Italians are selling to the army in Germany for deployment in Poland, and how does that do anything?
Well, and you just think, like, why didn't anybody think about Ron and call Ron? And that's really part of the reason why we've been doing these Freedom Fridays, because I see such great talent and ingenuity. And I also think about how many people you employ in that plant in Sanford. How many do you employ?
So we fluctuate. We're a little bit under 20 now, but again, it ebbs and flows based upon a requirement and supply and demand.
Right.
But those are jobs right here. And by the way, most of them are veterans. So
Yeah.
that's pretty exciting as well.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Ron. We loved hearing about World Housing Solution, and you've got a bunch of success stories to share. So I hope I can get you to come to GovCon Summit again.
You know what? I plan on being there.
All right. Well, very good. Thank you all for being here and have a great weekend.